And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this special edition episode of the Assembly Call. It is our NCAA Tournament preview edition of the Assembly Call. And I'm trying to think back to whether or not we did one of these last year. My guess is we probably didn't, because we were probably so upset at the end of the season that we didn't even want to talk too much basketball afterwards. But it's much more fun when a season ends like this one did, getting an NCAA tournament bid, and we get a chance here to talk not only about the bracket, of course, which we will do, but also to talk about Indiana's first-round matchup against Wichita State, which is a fascinating matchup in a lot of ways, and we will break that down. I am your host, Jared Morris, of course. I will be joined by Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips. Andy is here now. Ryan will be joining us in just a little bit. I do want to let you know, if you're listening to this tonight, if you're watching this live, or if you're listening to the podcast later tonight or Thursday morning, there is still time to get into the Assembly Call Bracket Challenge. So go to assemblycall.com/bracket. If you put that URL in, it will redirect you to the group page on the ESPN Tournament Challenge. Go there, submit your bracket. We'll have some kind of prize. It'll probably be a pint glass or a mug, something like that for the winner. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to disqualify anybody who chooses Kentucky as their champion. Probably not. We'll probably let it play fair. But we're going to talk about that because I had a real hard time picking my bracket. I know Andy did too. And something tells me there's a lot of IU fans who are feeling a similar kind of a pull to want to do something that maybe they feel like they shouldn't do. So we'll talk about all that. But to start out tonight, I want to spend at least the first 15, 20 minutes, if not more than that, talking about this matchup with Wichita State. And Andy, I'm going to send this over to you in a second. Let me open it up with just a couple of my opening thoughts. First thought is I'm getting really pissed off at all this talk about how Wichita State is excited to play Kansas. I'm seeing articles about it. Alex McCarthy just tweeted one. I tweeted one a couple of days ago. And I don't know, maybe I reacted a little bit much to call it whatever I said, disrespectful drivel or whatever term I used. But there's just something about it that kind of ticks me off when you overlook an opponent that much. And to be fair, it's not coming from the Wichita State team, but just kind of the I don't know, just how their fan base seems to be feeling about it. It's like, look, you got a team in front of you first that you need to beat. Now, my big problem with this is maybe it's just a sign of how Indiana's reputation nationwide isn't quite as high as we want it to be, so maybe that's more of an us problem than a them problem. But that has got me kind of amped up a little bit, and I'm hoping Tom Crean has some of that posted up on the bulletin board, just letting these guys know that, hey, you know, at least these fans are kind of overlooking you because certainly this team has played better from an underdog role. Now, the other point that I want to make is that when I first looked at this matchup, I felt pretty positive, simply because I looked at the sizes, and we saw that Wichita State has three guys who are 6'7" or above, and they're all 6'7". So this is not a tall team. And so I started to feel pretty good about the fact that, hey, maybe this team can't take advantage of us from a matchup perspective. But, Andy, here's what I want to lead into you with, which is that after looking at this further, and you really study Wichita State's backcourt, which is filled with juniors and seniors and experienced guys who have been number one seeds, played in a lot of games, it's made me a little bit more nervous because when you look at games Indiana's played well in and games it's won, James Blackman Jr. and Robert Johnson have typically played well. And my fear is that those guys haven't always played well against physical, experienced guards who can sometimes take them out of their game a little bit. And I feel, to me, like that is the biggest key. I think we can feel pretty confident with Yogi stepping up to the challenge. But it's Robert Johnson and James Blackman Jr. need to play more like juniors and seniors, both in terms of composure and physicality, to compete with Wichita State, which is a very backcourt-driven team. And if they don't, and if they let Wichita State's backcourt really dictate the pace and dictate the physicality of the game and take them out of their games, then it could be a longer afternoon for Indiana that we'd hope for, which is what we've seen in games past, and those guys have struggled like that. So that's my fear going into this game, and I certainly hope that that fear proves unfounded and that Robert and James have a big game. But I really feel like our ability to win or lose is going to hinge on those guys' ability to step up in a game where the backcourt's going to be so important. And with that, I'll send it over to you.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, in looking at Wichita State a little bit, I went back and watched kind of bits and pieces over the last couple of days of their second game against Northern Iowa, so the one they played at home and the one they won. So it was really the most recent game they've had against a tournament caliber team, I'd say. So that's kind of why I picked that one, and it was somewhat easy to find as well. So, I think what they do defensively, at least, both Tequil Cotton and Fred VanVleet were first-team all-defense in the Missouri Valley, and they press a little bit, but they press more just to really to try to slow the game down a bit to their pace. They don't really trap, they don't do whatever. It's more of a kind of token pressure, kind of a nuisance, but really helps prevent the other team from getting into their offense very early in the clock because they want to play at a slower pace. So I do think they're really good at pressuring the ball, jumping passing lanes. They're going to want to push IU off the three-point line. What they don't have this year that they had last year when they did that was a guy like Clanthony early inside who would be able to block some of those shots. And so that's where the height comes into play a little bit in my eyes, is that there really isn't a rim protector down there, which is a familiar refrain for all of us over the course of the season. Darius Carter is a decent shot blocker, but he's only 6'7", and I think that's a potential challenge for him. So they're going to definitely press up on guys on the perimeter, and I think it's a question of whether a guy like Yogi in particular can really get into the lane consistently. I'll give credit here to if anybody follows Jord Cubs Dan on Twitter, Jordan Majewski, at least I think that's how you pronounce his last name. He watches, I would say, a lot more college basketball than I do, and I feel like I watch a lot. But his knowledge of a lot of these teams is really good. And so he had a preview up on his site. It's called "Staring at the Floorboards" is his site. And one of the things he mentioned about this game was that there at least have, for as good as Wichita State is defensively, there have at least been times where they can get beaten off the dribble by, as he said, I'll just kind of read it from this. The good news for IU is that Wichita has shown a propensity to get beaten off the dribble by small, quick guards. See Wes Washpun, who's a Northern Iowa player in the first game they played, and Yogi can beat anyone off the dribble. So I think that's going to be important. I think if Johnson can do that, all the better. But I think it becomes even more important for Yogi because, when they struggled, even in portions of the Northern Iowa game that I watched that they won, a lot of it was because Northern Iowa was running everything through Seth Tuttle, who's a big guy on their team and a really good player. May actually have been the Missouri Valley Player of the Year, or if he wasn't, he was right there. And so, he was drawing a lot of attention inside. They really didn't have anybody to match up with him. They would slack off inside, and he'd be able to, when Wichita State or when Northern Iowa went on, I think it was about a 12-0 run, he would just pitch it out to guys for threes. IU obviously doesn't dump the ball into the post with any regularity whatsoever. Certainly not if Hunter isn't in the game, and even when he is, that's something they don't do very often. So I think that lack of a kind of back to the basket or post up threat might hurt IU in that regard because it doesn't give those guys a reason to back off. But I do think it's going to be important for whether it be Yogi or Blackman or whoever to get into the lane. I guess Yogi's the one that obviously we all trust the most at this point because certainly some of the times we talked about how loose Johnson and Blackman can be with the ball, particularly as guys try to knock it away from behind. That becomes problematic. I don't worry about that as much from a press standpoint, but more in the half court as things start to break down. So I do think that's going to be a huge matchup in the game, and I'm sure we'll get to the inside presence a bit later. But I think that they're even Ron Baker is a pretty good defender, and so their ability to put pressure on IU on the perimeter is going to be important. But if there's one area of their game they haven't been great at, is they have allowed a relatively high three-point shooting percentage. But it's really just a matter of somebody being able to get into the lane and force the defense to react. They're not just going to give them up too much, without that drive and kick action first.
Yeah, they are 186 in the country in defending the three-point line. So, Andy, let me ask you this, because this is another, I guess, line of reasoning that we get from Indiana fans especially that I've heard, which is, okay, this is Wichita State. This is a Missouri Valley team. They're not going to have dealt with our level of athletes very much. And when you look at their schedule, I mean, Wichita State is 28-4, but, they lost. Utah is the best team they played all year. They lost to them 69-68. They split their matchup against Northern Iowa, and other than that, their biggest win was over Alabama. And then, they played a whole bunch of teams in the mid-100s, 200s, so not that impressive of a schedule. But yet, you look at their efficiency numbers, which are adjusted for schedule, and this team is 21st in offense and 15th in defense, and rated 14th overall in KenPom. So, and even though this is a 7-10 matchup, a rating system like KenPom has quite a big gulf between Indiana and Wichita State, with Wichita State 14th and Indiana 55th. So can you, maybe I guess in words, because we can see the numbers, can you in words kind of bridge the gap between kind of the big conference reputation of Indiana, Wichita State coming from the mid-major? We know they were #1 seed last year, but I still feel like maybe there's a disconnect among some fans with how to reconcile the fact that, yeah, Indiana's a Big Ten team, but Wichita State is still pretty good too, even though they've played lesser of a schedule. Or do you think that they really haven't been tested, and that is something that's reasonable for this game?
I think the part of it that's most reasonable is that they really haven't played an offense like IU's at many turns during the season. Northern Iowa's a really good team, balanced on both sides. Utah is 20th offensively, so they're pretty good as well. But I think the number of games that they've played against teams that have at least shown the ability to play really well offensively is probably limited to the games, like the game against Utah and the two against Northern Iowa. So I do think that is a potential factor. What I would say on the flip side of that is that the Cleanthony early not being there is a huge difference between what they had last year and what they have this year. However, pretty much everybody else is back from the core of a team that nearly beat Kentucky, that went to the final game last year, and really played a bit tougher schedule last year as well. And so these guys have shown they've had enough games with that kind of talent that they've been able to acquit themselves really well, particularly on the defensive end. And what they do particularly well offensively is just that they don't beat themselves. They have a really low turnover rate, one of the lower ones in the country, and so they're not going to. I think that was Zach Osterman had written something up on the Indy Star, I think yesterday or the day prior, where he talked to some Missouri Valley coaches about them, and they really said, look, they're just not going to beat themselves. They shoot the three okay. They have an okay 2-point shooting percentage. Their offensive rebounding percentage is pretty good for a team that's so small. They're almost in the top 50 there, but they don't get to the line a lot. What they really do well on offense is they don't turn the ball over. They do a great job of controlling the pace. There aren't a lot of games that are getting up into the mid-60s in terms of possessions, and so they've been able to force teams to play the way that they want to play. And I think some of their defensive numbers, you could argue, are helped by the fact that there aren't a lot of great, big guys and a ton of size in the Missouri Valley. But you can't really make the argument that IU has the types of things that are going to allow them to exploit that with any regularity either. So I don't know if I just don't know that IU has a great way to take advantage of what their biggest weakness would be, which is really getting somebody inside that plays well. I do think Troy is a guy who is always the X factor for IU, and I think he's a guy who could have some success just because of his level of athleticism and trying to figure out who they would actually guard him with that wouldn't be giving up a pretty substantial amount of size.
Yeah, so what's going to happen there? I mean, let's look inside because, again, that's a place where Indiana has just gotten crushed this year, and it always seems like the most obvious matchup mismatch, but they don't really have that. Now, the thing is, they're a pretty good rebounding team despite their size. They are 55th in offensive rebounding percentage, 33rd in defensive rebounding percentage. And for Indiana, rebounding has been such a key. I mean, when we rebound well, we're typically in the game, and when we don't, we're typically not in it. So what are the keys going to be inside for Indiana, Andy? I mean, obviously, Troy's going to have to rebound and be out there doing Troy Williams things. How important will it be for Indiana to get a performance from a guy like Emmett Holt like they got in the Maryland game?
I think he's one that could be interesting to me because he would put a little bit of pressure inside. I mean, he's shown at least some ability to make some back to the basket moves, and shows some quickness and is able to do some things that way. So I think he's a guy, especially if Perea is out. It's something you at least want to try. Can you get him on the floor and dump the ball inside and see if he can make something happen? Because their bigger guys are 6'7" that actually play with any regularity, and they've had some mixed success. Darius Carter's the guy that plays the most. He's been a bit up and down. He's had some really good games. He's had some really poor games, at least just kind of glancing through the game log and looking at that. And then we got a Shaquille Morris, a freshman, who's got a decent amount of size inside, but he's not a huge scorer. So they're not necessarily, at least in the parts of the game that I watch back, they certainly will let Carter post up a bit and do tend to play more 4 out and 1 in and with him inside. They'll give him some chances. It's not necessarily a huge part of their game. A lot bigger part of their offense is ball screens and things like that for Van Vliet, and then running Baker off of a bunch of screens. So I don't know that it's something that they'll be able to take a lot of advantage of IU defensively either. But I do think it's a case where a guy like Troy might be able to have some success because they don't really have a natural matchup for him. My best guess in kind of watching them is they put Evan Wessel on him. He's a 6'4" guy that they essentially he's their second tallest starter. So maybe he draws that assignment. I think that's probably a challenging one for him, but there's not really maybe you put Baker on him. I'm not sure what exactly they'll do, but I do think it's a case where Troy's should have some advantage from an athleticism standpoint, even from a size standpoint. And unfortunately for him, posting up is not a big part of his game by any means, based on what we've seen. So I don't know how much he's able to take advantage of that, but he definitely is a guy from a size standpoint who's going to have a big advantage, and hopefully that manifests itself at the very least on the boards.
It sounds like this is actually the kind of game where if Hunter were healthy, and we'll get to this question real quick here from Dan Sismadia, who says, will Hunter play? And I don't think any of us know. I know he was out there practicing today, moving around. I think the expectation coming in was that he'd be kind of a game-time decision, maybe play 5-10 minutes. I don't think anybody was expecting a whole lot more than that. It seems like this could have been the type of game with some of the back-to-the-basket moves that he's shown in flashes where maybe we could have taken advantage of that. And perhaps we won't get a chance to see that because he may not play. But, our buddy J-Hub says, I know my IU blinders are on, but am I crazy to think we have a great shot at this one, even without a stellar three-point barrage? So, Andy, as we, talking about matchups and all this kind of stuff, what's your gut feeling? Where do you start to come down on this? Because, this Wichita State team, they sound to me a little bit like Wisconsin. They don't turn the ball over. They make you play at their pace. They've got experienced guards. And that hasn't always been a matchup that Indiana has dealt well with for 40 minutes. It's like we either get impatient or the offense just kind of stalls out, but we lose that happy medium that we really have when we're going. So do you think that Indiana will be able to find that and score effectively enough to win? How are you feeling right now?
I feel like I don't have a good answer. I've really gone back and forth on it. I probably, if anything, when I first saw the matchup, I thought this really doesn't, other than the height standpoint, doesn't really seem like it lines up well for IU because of the reasons that you just said, quite honestly. And then the more that I've tried to read up about it and look at things, I do think there are some chances for IU to be able to get into the lane. I do think Yogi's the kind of guy that can give them problems defensively and create for others, but it really at that point just comes down to are you making shots? And I think we found, this year that, this team is one that draws a lot of confidence from making shots, and when they don't, they get impatient, like you said, haven't made a shot, and then they hang their head on defense. And I think the thing that probably worries me the most defensively for IU is that they run a lot of high ball screens for Van Vliet, and they run Baker off just a ton of screens. And they do the same thing with Van Vliet to a certain extent, but Baker's the guy they really want to get shooting off of those situations. And I think where communication for IU has been such a problem defensively this year, I think there's I have a real concern that they're able to exploit that. And on the other side, if IU goes to a zone, I feel like with experienced guards like they have, they're just going to carve it up. And we obviously know that IU zone is nothing to be too terrified of in the first place. So it makes it feel that much worse because you've got a guy like Van Vliet who's completely in control of everything with their offense, and a guy like Baker who they can kick the ball out to and make shots. And so I've been all over the place on it. I think at first did not like IU's chances a lot. I think I've got to in the middle of the week, or at least since the selection show has been, I started to feel a little bit better, and then you watch other things and you kind of think like everything that this team has done wrong over the course of this season, Wichita State is going to be able to exploit. So they play really good defense. Can they force IU into rash of turnovers like we've seen? They're really efficient offensively and can grind it out and kind of get you to play at their pace. And they do a lot of things that I think IU will struggle with defensively. So that you kind of look at it that way, and I guess I sound like I'm not all that confident in IU in this one. At the same time, it wouldn't shock me in the least to see IU win, because we know that if they can, play well offensively, they can really put a lot of pressure on Wichita State. And I don't think it'll be enough to speed them up necessarily. I think you had forwarded a couple questions to us that you had gotten, and whether people had really tried to press Wichita State, or they'd really been able to be sped up over the course of the year. And if you look back, I don't really have much to go on other than this. I've only watched them play in bits and pieces. There are very few games where they're up over the 65 possession mark, which I think is about the average for the country. And so there are really hardly any games that are that way. I don't think they played one game in the Missouri Valley where they were over 65, and even only a couple where they got to 65. So I don't think it's a case where IU it doesn't feel like IU can make them uncomfortable, I guess you could say, if you think of it that way. So I wouldn't be surprised to see IU win, but I guess at this point I'm a little worried that they're going to be able to carve IU up defensively based on some of the issues that IU has had over the course of the season that we have talked about at great length.
Yeah, I mean, I'll put it this way. I mean, I'm kind of like you. I've hemmed and hawed a little bit here as we've gone. I never changed. I never hemmed and hawed on my pick. I always knew I was going to pick Indiana over Wichita State. But, it's funny because, again, I think some of the initial reactions, you dig a little bit deeper, and then you think about what this team is good at and what they're not good at, and you kind of change your thinking a little bit. So we'll get picks in a second. Ryan, I want to bring you in here too, but I want to point out a couple of interesting numbers, and Ryan, I'll lead you into talking with these because I think they're really going to be important, because I really think that the team whose guards play better is going to win this game. I really do, because these are two teams that are so guard dominated. And I think a note about Yogi is that we've seen this year that in games against kind of alpha dog point guards for the opposing team, he seems to have a little extra juice. And, the numbers kind of bear that out. He's scoring, I think, 21.3 points per game. I looked it up in games against Devontae Smith, Rivera, D'Angelo Russell, and Melo Trimble, who were really the only guys that were like the clear alpha dog point guards in the game. He's scoring 21.3 points a game, up over his season average of 16.1. The problem is that Indiana only went 2-4 in those games. And in the 4 games that Indiana lost, Yogi actually shot the ball 16 times. In the 2 we won, he shot the ball 9 times. And what I think that shows, he also had fewer assists in those 6 games than he did for the season. And I think what that shows is, sometimes when Yogi gets in those mano-a-mano battles, I know he wants to show how good he is, but I think, and he certainly scores, and he has scored well in those games, but perhaps to the detriment of getting everybody involved. And I think when Indiana's offense and as a team has functioned the best, Yogi's really picked his spots early and made sure to get guys involved. And so I know with Fred Van Vliet opposite him, I'm sure that alpha that's inside of Yogi, which is part of what makes him great, is going to kick in. And I think it's going to be important that he do enough, but not too much. And I think all of us who have watched the games know what I mean by that. And I think the biggest thing Yogi can do is get James Blackman Jr. going. I mean, we have 40 minutes. It's one and done if we lose this game. And when you really look back at Indiana's wins and losses, the biggest difference a lot of times has been James Blackman Jr. In the 12 losses that he's participated in, because he missed the Wisconsin game, he averaged 11.83 points. And he's averaging 15.8 for the season. So you can tell in Indiana's wins, he's averaging 18, 19, 20 points. And I just think it's so important to find a way to get him going. Get him going early, making some shots, getting some easy shots. And, you would like to say, hey, come out and play defense, let that get you going. But I think it's so important. I think the onus is going to be on Yogi. Obviously, it's on James to come out with the right mindset. But I think, if Yogi is really kind of thinking long-term for the full 40 minutes, getting James Blackman Jr. going early is so important for this team, especially in this game. So to me, those are two of the really big keys that I think even as you watch through the first 10, 15 minutes of the game, I think that will give a pretty good indication of how Indiana's doing and how they're going to be able to compete for the full 40 minutes. Ryan, with that said, go over to you, get your thoughts on this game.
Yeah, I think I watched a lot of Wichita State last year, as I think most of us did during their undefeated run. And then I watched them some at the beginning of this year, and it looked like the same team, as Andy said, minus Clay Anthony Early, which is a huge loss for them. But at the same time, this is a team that is going that Indiana can beat. I mean, if you look at, as you guys have been talking about, you look at what they do well, what Indiana does well, it's a favorable matchup. It's not a bad matchup. The problem is these are veteran players who know their system well, run their system, and they defend. and they're not going to make a lot of mistakes, as Andy pointed out. They don't beat themselves. So I obviously don't have the extensive knowledge that Andy does of them, but from what I've seen, I think it's a disciplined, solid team that is going to make you beat them. They're not going to beat themselves. And so I think you're right. I think James Blackman Jr. is a huge key because he's going to have a veteran guarding him. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of talking going on. There's going to be a lot of, egging him on to shoot, egging him on to drive to try and make spectacular plays. And James has to show his maturity and tune all that out and just do what he can do. And if his shot's not there, he needs to facilitate for other people instead of forcing it, and he needs to play defense. And I think that we'll see a guy like Robert Johnson come out and play a solid game defensively and then, be a facilitator and hit open shots when he has them. But I don't think he's the kind of guy who will force things in a game like this, whereas I think James and Troy can both kind of get into a mode where if things aren't going well, they try and force things. The key to this game, in my opinion, is going to be the first 5 to 7 minutes of the second half. I expect it to be within 10 points one way or the other at the half. As both teams sort of feel each other out. They've both been off for a few days, and it's the tournament. Everyone's going to be hyped. They're going to be in a different environment. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to take a little bit of time to get into the game, most likely. But I think that Indiana has to come out of the half on fire and really attack and attack the middle of Wichita State's defense, whether that means taking it to the hole or just driving through the paint and kicking, like we saw when Indiana's offense has been successful. I think that's the key to the game. Just continue to attack. You have nothing to lose. Like you said, it's one and done, and we're an underdog. Just go out there, play with a chip on your shoulder, and go do it. And if you don't, at least you lose fighting, not just kind of being lethargic on offense and stuff like that. It should be an attack mentality from the opening tip. And you know what? If you commit a couple turnovers, but you're trying to be aggressive, nobody's going to have a problem with that. They're going to have a problem with lackadaisical offense and firing up shots as the shot clock expires. So it's just got to be an attack mentality, and they got to play with a chip on their shoulder, like we've seen them do a couple times this year successfully.
Andy, let's get some picks. I think the issue that we're coming to with this game is that you kind of know what to expect from Wichita State. They're a veteran team. We've seen them in the tournament last year. And I think the problem we're having with Indiana is we don't really know which Indiana team to expect. I mean, the last two games, Indiana played pretty well the last two games, actually. Obviously against Northwestern and for the most part against Maryland, but then you contrast that with the 3 games prior. And so I think it's just which Indiana team comes out. I think that's why we're having trouble, being all one way, because it's like, well, if the Indiana team of the last 3 games of the regular season comes out, this Wichita State team is going to exploit every weakness and win by 20. And if the Indiana team that played against Northwestern comes out, our athleticism gives us a big advantage. We make shots, and we might win by 6 or 7 points. And there's really, with this team, you can say you feel confident one way, which I'm going to, but we don't really know because this team simply hasn't been consistent enough, and we're going up against a team that is consistent.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I keep thinking about with this team is that even though at the end of last year we knew things were bad, you knew what to expect. You had an idea of what was going to happen in the game. It wasn't going to be enjoyable, but you had a good idea of what was going to happen in the game. And I think that's what struggle with this year is like you don't really. I guess maybe trust is the best word I can think of. Like I don't think any of us can say we really trust this team based on how they've played and the up and down way they've played, even in the last month of the season. And so that's where it becomes like you have no idea the range of how this team could look over this game is pretty amazing. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they lost by 15. I wouldn't be surprised if they won by 10. And so I think that I guess that speaks to the way the season's gone overall. So I think of keys to the game just before I pick. So one is turnovers to me. They force turnovers a lot. That's one area that IU has in large part corrected from last season, but has still shown streaks at times where they can get careless with the ball. And because Wichita State is playing a lot of small guys, they've got active hands. They're trying to get in there and poke the ball away as you drive to the basket. So guys like Troy and Blackman and Johnson have to protect the ball if they go and drive into the lane, which is what they're going to have to do in this game. I don't know that they'll give up too many things on the Wichita State's press, but I think they could give up as they drive into the lane, just get the ball knocked away. So that to me is one. Rebounding is another. Offensive rebounding is something that IU's done well for the most part this season. Ranks pretty high in offensive rebounding percentage. Wichita State's been really good at preventing that, and also really good on the offensive end, which, as I mentioned before, is pretty odd for a team with their size. Or I guess lack of size. So those I think are big. Troy I talked about earlier. I think he has to come out and have a really good game. And the other guy who I really think is somewhat of an X factor here is Robert Johnson, because it's going to be so crucial for IU to be able to contain the guards on the outside, Cotton and Van Vliet, and also chase Baker off these screens. He's going to draw the assignment on one of those guys, and probably all 3 of them at various points during the night. And I think how he plays, particularly defensively, is going to be really important. I think whatever they can get from him on the offensive end is a bonus. But he's shown flashes of being able to really step up and defend. And as we all know, that's what's going to make or break this team going forward. So those are, I guess that's 4 keys, but those are at least some of the things that I'm looking for. I'm going to pick IU. I think if for no other reason than I can't really envision them making a tournament and me not picking them. So it's definitely if I was impartial, I'm not sure I would make the same pick, but I think at this point, I'd like to think this team can rally and pull together a bit, show some of the things that they showed in the Big Ten tournament, and come out with a win. But like I said, I think there's a pretty wide range of potential point spreads and outcomes in this one, but I'll give the Hoosiers the edge with my heart.
Does any fan base have less of an idea what to expect from their team first round matchup?
I will say I'm tempted to change my pick to Wichita State because my mother-in-law has a pool, and you can pick the play-in games, and I'm currently 0 for 3 as it stands right now. So pretty much me picking whoever is a kiss of death. So I would consider changing my pick to Wichita State to hopefully propel IU into the second round.
All right, Ryan, let's get your pick, and I want to lead you into it with this because I just realized we've gone 35 minutes. We haven't mentioned the names Nick Zeisloff and Colin Hartman once. And I'll tell you why I think that is. Number one, Colin, we've seen his play fade a little bit down the stretch. And while I thought he did a few more Colin Hartman things in the Big Ten tournament, he's clearly not the same guy. And Nick Zeisloff, after his flurry to end the season, we saw both Northwestern and Maryland really key on him and not give him open looks. And that certainly helps the team from a spacing perspective. But I think it's pretty reasonable to think that Wichita State will have watched that film and that Zeisloff won't be getting many open looks. So I think obviously anything we get from those guys is a bonus. But I don't, if Zeisloff doesn't hit threes and if Hartman struggles, I still think the team can win without that. But obviously anything we get from them is a bonus. But I didn't want to go the whole 35 minutes without mentioning those two guys' names because they've been important players. And maybe you disagree with me. Maybe you think they are the X factors.
No, I don't. I think Hartman defensively helps sort of get everybody together and make sure guys, and he makes up for other guys' mistakes because he sees the floor so well. But Zeisloff, I think it's hit or miss. I mean, if he hits a couple big threes, that's a huge bonus. But I don't think it's something you can rely on at this point because they're, those guys are definitely going to run out on him and not, let him get his shot off. So. It'd be nice for Hartman to give us about 6 to 9 points or something like that and just play defense, but I'm certainly not going to count on that and say that, hang our hopes on that. That said, I think I'll pick Indiana just because somebody was talking to me earlier about who I thought was going to win a tournament, and they gave me a couple choices, and I just said, please don't make me pick Kentucky. Please, just don't make me pick Kentucky. So for that reason, and my bias, I'm going to have to pick Indiana because I will not sleep tonight if I pick Wichita State. But I do think this is a game they can win. This isn't some out there prediction. I think this is a team. The matchup isn't terrible. I mean, some people seem to think that Wichita State is this phenomenal team. I disagree. I think they're a very good team, but I don't think they're going to run through this tournament like they didn't do last year. I don't think that they're an upset pick to run through it. Now, I could be completely wrong. I haven't watched them a ton this year, but just based on everything I've read and seen and the film I've watched, I think Indiana can play with this team, and I think if it comes down late, I think that Indiana showed early in the season that it can win close games late, and that's been gone for a while, and I think for some reason I just have a feeling that that's going to come back and that these guys have new life and are focused and want to win.
Yeah, Andy brings up a good point here actually in our chat that Zeisloff should know them after playing in the Missouri Valley the last few years. And we know that guys sometimes get a comfort level or kind of a fear level against certain teams, like Troy just never seems to play well against Michigan State, for example. So it's interesting to just look and see what Zeisloff has done against Wichita State. And last year as a sophomore at Wichita State, he scored 9 points, 3 of 6 from downtown. In their home game, he played 28 minutes in that game. In the home game, 26 minutes, he had no points. He was 0 for 5 from downtown. I don't know what he did there as a freshman. Actually, we'll pull it up right now and see. Actually, he didn't play in one game. He didn't play in either game against Wichita State as a freshman. So anyway, so he's had one decent game. If we can get 9 points out of him, 3 threes, I think we would all take that. As for me, yeah.
Go ahead and do your pick. I've got something to say after that, though, on this whole thing.
Okay, I'm picking Indiana. I mean, and not just because I always pick Indiana, but I really think at the end of the season, the pressure in Bloomington just got so heavy on these guys that getting away became a good thing. I liked what I saw in the Big Ten tournament, and I think now what we have seen from this team is in moments of urgency, kind of with their backs against the wall, yes, down 10-15 late in games, for whatever reason, they started playing harder. Well, now you have the game equivalent of that, and I just think that Tom Crean's teams over the years have always performed better as an underdog as opposed to a favorite. And we're going in as a 10 seed. People didn't think we should have made the tournament. You've got all these whispers about, hey, can't wait till Wichita State plays Kansas. There's all these little things that I don't trust Tom Crean in all games. But I trust him in games like this where we're an underdog, when there's been some time to prepare. He's actually done, and we're not on the opponent's home floor. If it was at Wichita State, it'd be different. But he's done a pretty decent job over his history in games like this. And so I think we'll come ready to play. And if we do come ready to play, I think we have the athletes to go out there and beat Wichita State. We just have to make shots. And that of course, means we have to get good shots. But I think if we come ready to play and focused, we'll get them. And I just have a hunch that we'll make them. So I think we all agree, like Andy said, there's about a 20-point range this game could finish in. And so we can only predict anything with so much confidence. But my gut feeling going into it is I feel good, and I'll be surprised if we lose. So for whatever that is worth, that's how I'm feeling going into this game. Brian, your comment.
I just wanted to say, Andy said that it's kind of funny because last year at the end of the year we kind of knew what to expect, and this year we don't. How did we survive last year doing the show? I really don't remember. I've kind of blacked it out, and I'm not sure how we got through the season. I just wanted to throw that out there. I'm not at all nostalgic for that at all.
I don't know. Something tells me if we went back and listened to those shows, they would sound really depressed. A lot of
I'm not
Hoosier
going
fans.
Just in case anybody's wondering, I'm not going to go back and watch those. So
yeah, I don't know what your deal is. Earlier this year, you tried to get us to go back and watch the first Northwestern game, and now you want us to go back and listen to those shows. I don't know what kind of. You're always so positive, yet it seems like you want to drag us into some type of.
No,
terribly
I'm just saying. I was trying to answer his question. If we listened, I'm sure it would not sound very, very happy. I think we got through it with beer. You know, as Chronic Hoosier called it a season on the drink. I think that's the way that everybody got through it.
The beer, the solution to all of life's problems, right?
Yeah. Yes, indeed. All right, so that is the IU Wichita State preview. The fun thing is we're going to find out for sure here on Friday. The game is Friday at 1. I think it's about 1:45. The game, it's going to be on CBS. It'll happen after the Kansas game. Okay, here I know what. Here.
2:45 Eastern. So 1:45 for you, 2:45 Eastern, roughly.
Yeah. Oh yeah. All right, so let me lead into the bracket talk with this, and you guys may think I'm crazy, so feel free to jump all over me. I had an easier time picking Indiana to beat Kansas in the round of 32 than I did to beat Wichita State in the first round. Is that crazy? I don't know why. I just don't have that much faith in this Kansas team, and I feel like Indiana would play really well against them. Is that crazy?
No, I mean, especially when you think about how streaky IU's been, that if they would play well enough to win that, they'd have some confidence. You know, Kansas has, again, it's kind of a case of, you don't look at big guys. They've got some really talented wing players, and Perry Ellis is a good player inside. He's coming off a knee injury. Cliff Alexander's out, so they don't have a huge inside presence.
I'm sorry, Andy, to interrupt. Is it true that Perry Ellis might miss the first weekend? I heard that rumor, but I didn't hear it substantiated.
I haven't heard anything definitive, and I really haven't been around much today to see what's been out there lately. But I know they said he was, hoping to get back. They held him out of some of those games. Definitely without him, they really don't have much of an inside presence. So it's another case of they're really tough defensively, and they have a lot of good athletes. But I do think in that case, it's again, it's not necessarily a team who, can be like a Purdue and just dump the ball inside on every possession and really cram it down IU's throat.
All right, so let's. Oh, and by the way, it says I just saw a headline. It says Perry Ellis getting his explosion back. So for whatever, take that for what it's worth. I didn't do too much digging. So let's talk bracket. I want to get your guys. We want to get Final Four picks. Want to get some upset picks. Let me just kind of lead into this conversation by saying that when I first did my bracket, I had Indiana going all the way and winning it all. That's just how it happens. And when I was doing it, I fully believed it the entire time. Upon revisiting the bracket, I realized, look, we can't really trust this team to play 2 good games in a row. So to predict them to win 6 in a row, I mean, that's just insane. So I thought better of it. So for a while, then I had them just going to the Final Four because the problem is I do think Indiana's. I know Ryan's laughing over here. I do think Indiana's going to win the first 2 games, and frankly, I think if they beat Wichita State, I feel a lot more confident about the Kansas game, like I said. And the thing is, when I was going through it, I had them beating Notre Dame and facing Kentucky in the Final Four, and I cannot possibly, if it's Indiana against Kentucky, pick against Indiana. I just would never be able to do it. And so as I finally did my bracket, I realized, okay, we get to the Sweet 16. We face Notre Dame. Notre Dame's pretty damn good. They just won the ACC championship. They will probably beat us. And then they will face Kentucky. And for a while, I had them beating Kentucky, but I thought better of that. So I have Kentucky making it to the Final Four and losing to Arizona. And then Villanova and SMU on the other side, with Villanova winning that game and then Arizona and Villanova playing in the title game and Arizona winning. So that is my Final Four. And I do think there aren't many teams that you can make a reasonable argument could beat Kentucky. I've watched Arizona a few times. They have size. They've got athleticism. They have NBA players. They're a team that could do it. And it was really hard for me to pick them over Wisconsin. I think both those are Final Four teams. Unfortunately, they have to play before the Final Four. But I just think Arizona's playing as well as everybody right now. And I don't think anyone will beat Kentucky in the championship game because I think at that point there's as much pressure on the team playing Kentucky as there is on Kentucky. But I do think someone could beat them in the Final Four. So that's my story. That's what I'm saying is going to happen. Ryan, we'll go to you first. Let's get your Final Four picks, and then we'll do some upset picks after that.
Sorry, I had to unmute there. I do have Kentucky in the Final Four, unfortunately, and I almost threw up when doing that. So I've got them going through. I have Wisconsin making the Final Four, so chalk in those two. I think that VCU could take out Arizona. Their style is so hard to prepare for that on short notice that would be a really tough thing to adjust for. So I think that they could take out Arizona if they play their game and play well. I have in the East, I have Virginia coming out. That's really tough for me because Virginia is miserable to watch, but they execute so well. I think Villanova is going to get taken out by Northern Iowa or Louisville.
Whoa. Okay.
I do. UNI, hey, they're a pretty good 5 seed, I think.
Yeah.
So I think they could whoever wins the UNI Louisville game, if they play each other, could take out Villanova, who I really like, but I just don't see them as a great fit in the tournament. And so I think Virginia and Michigan State are going to go toe to toe in that round of 32 game, and whoever wins that, I think will have a pretty solid path to the Final Four. And in the South, I've actually gotten upset early. I know we're going to talk upsets in a minute, but I've got San Diego State taking Duke out in the second round. I think they match up. I think they match up really well because of their size and defense. If they make any shots whatsoever, they'll win. I think they have the best defense in the country. And then
you know what? You know what people keep forgetting about Duke is that team is terrible on defense. They are 90 or they're 56th in adjusted. It's 56th in adjusted defensive efficiency. No team that's finished outside of the top 30 has made the Final Four.
Hey, and if anybody knows terrible defense, it's the three of us, by God. So we know that's true.
And Mike Krzyzewski and his flopping ridiculousness. I've got Iowa State going to the Final Four out of the South. Whoever wins that, Gonzaga. I think Gonzaga, and then we'll face off in the Sweet 16, and whoever wins that goes for me. So I've got what's my final here? I've got Virginia, Iowa State, Kentucky, and Wisconsin. And I've got Wisconsin taking out Kentucky. I mean, I don't really think that's going to happen. I mean, if I had to bet my house on somebody to win, of course it would be Kentucky, but I think Wisconsin takes them out. I think Virginia beats Iowa State, and I think Wisconsin beats Virginia. So that's what I got without looking into it too deeply.
I don't think they're going to do it, man. I don't think they were tested that much in the SEC, and I think they're going to face some tough tests here in the tournament.
That Kentucky team is beatable. They beat 90% of the teams they face before anybody steps on the floor. It's wow, they're big and they're athletic. We can't beat them, and somebody's gonna step up and punch them in the face. And I don't know who that's gonna be, but somebody will. I was actually saying, I said San Diego State will take out Duke. I would have loved to see San Diego State because they're so athletic and big. I would have loved to see them play Kentucky. I don't think they beat Kentucky, but that's the team that could set up a blueprint for how to beat them, and it's out tough them and out physical them. So hopefully Wisconsin's playing very well right now, and they're hitting on all cylinders, and I think they're primed to make a run.
Yeah. All right, Andy.
All right. Well, so a couple things. I'll preface this with I feel like ever since I started doing bracket projections that so much about these teams that you can talk yourself into or out of anything. So I end up being crippled by the decision-making process if I'm actually going to write down. So I'm not actually done, which is arguably the worst part. And my wife would tell you how much time I've spent looking at it over the last couple of days. is really demoralizing for all of us. So I do have.
Your wife is a saint, by the way. The amount of time that she lets you do bracketology.
God bless that woman.
There's no question. There's no question. So I do have Kentucky coming out of the Midwest. If IU played Notre Dame, that game would be first team to 100 would win. I would guess in that case. But I do have Kentucky coming out there. I just don't think there's anybody in that region that really can challenge them a great deal because nobody's balanced enough on both ends of the floor. Purdue, I think on the one hand has some size, but I just don't think they'd be able to score well enough against them to put pressure on. And Notre Dame, I think, can score really well, but really can't guard them. So I don't really see a scenario in which they don't come out of there. Hopefully that's jinxing them. I have Wisconsin coming out of the West. I have it down to them in Arizona. That was one of the games that I really struggled to pick. I think that'll be a really good game. It was a great game last year, but think that Wisconsin's playing really well. I think there's at least some talk that Trey Jackson might be back, so that would definitely help them as well.
Andy, I had a question on that Arizona. Do you think that with their youth that they'll get it together for this tournament? Do you think that they'll, relying so much on Stanley Johnson? Do you think that he's solid enough right now in his footing that he'll be able to lead them? That's what I struggled with.
Yeah, I think again, you look at the tempo and the way Wisconsin would try to slow them down a little bit. They're really good defensively, which I think is going to translate well either way. But I do think when you really look down their roster, you've got Stanley Johnson who's led them in scoring. Brandon Ashley's playing really well as a big guy, and McConnell is a good point guard. So they looked really good coming down the stretch. They also lost 3 games to teams that weren't anywhere close to getting in the tournament at various points throughout the year. And I don't know if that was just I don't want to say they were bored or something like that, but it does kind of raise a red flag to a certain extent of some of the teams that they lost to. So that probably was the deciding factor for me, and the fact that Wisconsin had gotten them last year with largely the same personnel. But I think that would be a really good game. I think one of my I think I saw Dockage made his picks and talked about that might be one of the games of the tournament. I think it was one of the games of the tournament last year, if not the game of the tournament, and I think it would be the same again. I got Virginia in the East. That's putting a lot of faith in Justin Anderson getting back to the way that he looked earlier in the season, because if it was based on the way he looked in the ACC tournament, I wouldn't feel very good about it, but I'm thinking that experience gets him back in the mix there a little bit. And then in the South, I'm kind of waffling between Duke and Gonzaga, and I really like Iowa State as well. I think had those three not all been in the same region, I could have arguably seen myself picking any of the three to go. So I've got Duke written in right now, but I could easily see myself changing that at this point. And then, as I was telling Jared before we got on, I haven't actually finished who I thought would win because I can't physically bring myself to write Kentucky down. So it's the part of you that's like, well, I'm entering this pool and I'm putting in money for it, and I'd really like to win it, to the I'm not sure I can live with myself, and I physically cannot make myself write, my hand move with the pen to write that down. So to this, I mean, I'm like you, Ryan. If somebody told me, put a gun to my head and said you have to pick somebody to win, that's who I would pick. But it is definitely tough to do that. I know my wife said she just couldn't do it and ended up picking Wisconsin to win. So I haven't decided who I'm going to pick yet, but I have a hard time thinking that I probably will end up picking them as the winner. But I suppose you never know.
Follow your wife's lead.
Depends on how much I drink before I finish filling out the bracket. Maybe I'll lose consciousness. I'm not sure.
So how much is the buy-in for the bracket challenge? Because I'm curious how much you're charging for your soul these days.
Nice.
Don't pick Kentucky.
I know.
You just have to pick whoever you want. I really don't think they're going to do it. I think they're going to fumble and stumble at some point. I realize they're great and everything, and they are phenomenal. But I think someone's going to get them.
I think if they, I view it like you do. I think the team that is probably best suited to beat them is Wisconsin and maybe Arizona. I don't see anybody coming out of the East or the South that could really beat them. I suppose you could make the argument that the way Virginia is defensively can help, but they just don't have. Not going to be able to score enough over the size that they have, and Duke doesn't play defense well enough. So it just becomes at that point like you don't really. I think if they get past that, so it's really a question of does whoever you have coming out of the West, do you think they can beat them? Because I think to your point, if they get to the championship game, it's going to be there is, like you said, as much pressure on the other team as there is them, because you're trying to not only prevent history, but you're staring down the barrel of another team going 40-0 who's just at that point will probably have steamrolled everybody to get there. So I do think they're going to have to drop somewhere before then. I think the best chance for that is whichever of those teams comes out of the West.
Yeah, of course, we say that even though recent sports history would dispute that, because the Giants ended up beating the Patriots in the Super Bowl, getting all the way to the last game. So who knows? But that's what makes it to me anyway.
Like I said, I think 90% of the teams are beaten before they ever step on the floor against Kentucky. But I will say this. As much of an Indiana homer as I am, that Kentucky team is fun to watch sometimes, man. Just the defense alone. It really is. They are super talented. And the other thing is, I don't think a lot of these guys care. Sure, it'd be nice to win a national title, but they all know they're going to be playing in the NBA next year regardless of how they perform in this tournament. So I think that if you catch a team like that and punch them in the mouth, maybe they'll just be like, who cares? They want history. Don't get me wrong. They all want that. They all want to win a title. But I think that it's the situation where that's not the ultimate goal to them. And if a team that really is, this tournament means everything to them, faces them and punches them in the mouth, they could be beat. But, God, I have to admit, sometimes that Kentucky team is really fun to watch.
I think I disagree with you, because I think these guys have all sacrificed just to win this title and just to go undefeated. I actually see them getting more tight than being too loose, because I think they've put everything into we're all sacrificing to go undefeated and to win this title. And if we don't, then why the hell was I coming off the bench? And why was I only taking 5 shots a game? To me, that's when it all starts to unravel. I don't know. Here we are.
You make a good point. It could go either way. I just think that's how they're going to be beaten. Is you're going to see a bunch of guys with no clear leader, just kind of be, get kind of, because they're all alpha dogs playing in the same barn, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens when they finally get put to a serious test with history on the line. And I would hope that somebody is willing to poke the dragon.
Dan Schilling asks us, it seems like one of the most chalk tourneys in recent memory and hate it to my core. Are you guys seeing the same thing? I think we did. Go ahead, Ryan.
Everybody thinks that until day 1 and 2. Until the first weekend's over, and they're like, oh crap. Even if 1 seeds all make it, there's going to be other stuff in there that's crazy, because there's always other stuff in there that's crazy. My favorite story so far is Eastern Washington's coach, what's his name? It's Jim Hayford, was on the Jim Rome show today, and as he was signing off said, we're going to win. They're playing Georgetown, and he said, we're going to win, Jim, and we're going to talk again. And he just hung up, and Jim Rome, for once in his life, was speechless. He was just like, wow, he called his shot, and he said we're going to win. And you know what? That's the attitude of some of these underdogs, and that's why they eventually, upend some of these teams. So, yeah, the great teams might be far and above and might be chalk, and you may not get a 12 seed going to the Final Four like we've seen before, but I think that it's still going to be a great tournament, because there's always those little guys stepping up to knock somebody out.
All right, so real quick, what double-digit seeds besides Indiana do you have in the Sweet 16? And if you don't have Indiana, then that's fine. Say that. I have Indiana and Stephen F. Austin. Andy?
I don't think I have any double-digit seeds in Sweet 16. I did. Stephen F. Austin's one I contemplated. I don't think the matchup with Utah is a great one for them, but they've been a really good team, over the course of the season. I think even that Eastern Washington team against Georgetown could, that might be one where you have the 12 playing the 13, which seems like it happens from time to time. I didn't end up picking Eastern Washington because their defense is just so bad. And again, we are experts on poor defense. But I did have Buffalo. I had Buffalo beating West Virginia in the first round. I think they've got some experienced guards, don't turn the ball over a lot against the press there. Although I can see them getting hammered on the glass. And then I have Wofford over Arkansas. I think they can slow the game down. Although I feel like I've suckered myself into picking Wofford or other teams in their conference in the past couple seasons and been woefully disappointed. But I have those. I think I have almost all the 10 seeds except Michigan State winning a game. I think those are, as I just kind of scan down, what I have scratched out. I really thought BYU might be able to beat Xavier had they not given up 60-some points in the second half last night. So that was
talk about bad defense.
That was terrible. But
that game was awesome.
It really was. It really was.
Oh, it was wonderful.
Right. Ryan, what double-digit seeds do you have?
I don't have my filled-out bracket in front of me. I just have I'm just sort of scanning. I filled out a couple because people have asked me to join their pools. I think Dayton could make a quick run. I like what Archie Miller does. They may not even win tonight, but if they make it, I could see them making a quick run and just upsetting some people. I think that like Andy was saying, Stephen F. Austin and Eastern Washington could happen with Stephen F. Austin getting out of there into the Sweet 16. This isn't a double-digit seed, but I like VCU on a short turnaround to maybe upend Arizona. That's an upset. That's a pretty big upset, I think, because Arizona could have been a 1 seed if things broke correctly. Just looking them over, Wofford could easily get out of that little pod with Arkansas, UNC, and Harvard. I think, like Andy said, they can slow the game down and make some things happen. Indiana, I mean, look, you said it. If things break right, they could face Kansas, and who knows what you're going to get out of a Kansas team under Bill Self in the tournament. They're either eliminated in the first weekend or going to the Final Four, it seems like. And I think Buffalo, I don't think they're great, but I think that's sort of one of those teams that's gotten on a roll lately and could upend West Virginia, and then, if things break right, they could beat Maryland. So those are just some teams I think could make a run. I don't know really who I have picked through, but I think those are the teams I would incline to pick as an upset into the Sweet 16.
And let's close out real quick, Ryan. I want to talk about your article that you wrote about Tom Crean. You wrote it for Fansided. If you go to our Twitter accounts, Assembly Call, Rumors and Rants, you'll be able to find the article there. But if you want to just kind of summarize it, I mean, I think we've said all along that obviously we don't speculate about the coach's job when it's still in the season and when he still has the job. So we're not going to get into too much of the nitty-gritty and some of the rumors. But I mean, the rumor about Tom Crean working back channels for the Alabama job, that kind of gained national prominence. I mean, it's silly to not even talk about it because you had national writers who were commenting on that. Now, I haven't seen one shred of legitimate truth to it that ever made me really believe it, but it was out there. And obviously a couple weeks ago everything was kind of being said and it's died down some, and now we're in the tournament. And your article basically asked the question, did making the tournament save Tom Crean's job? And there's going to be a whole lot of time to talk about this in the offseason, but it's an interesting preface to our tournament game, wondering if a decision's been made, if that's on the line. I mean, maybe summarize your article and kind of talk about, I guess, just where things stand as of right now.
Well, what I said, and I thought before I started researching it and getting into it, I mean, I took pretty much the entire day yesterday and sort of dug through Crean's entire history at Indiana. And before I started, I thought I was pretty well set on the fact that he's probably going to be gone, unless we make a really deep run, just because all of these rumors and things like that have been going on for a few weeks, and it seems like it's gotten too far to put the brakes on and throw it in reverse. But after reading, after doing all the research and really remembering where we came from when he showed up, what we went through for 3 years rebuilding, and then how high we got, and then last year, how high we got in that great season we had where we were number one for 10 weeks, and then unfortunately lost in the Sweet 16, and then where we were last year with the high of the year before. We knew it was going to be a rebuilding year, but that just ended up being a disaster. There's no other word for it. It was a disaster of a season. And then this year has kind of been the high of being 15-4 and tied for first place in the Big Ten, and then collapsing a little down the stretch. It's a lot more complicated than I thought it would be setting out to write that article. It's a very complicated answer. And what I would say is I don't think reaching the tournament saved his job if his job is indeed on the line. I think this team would have to have a good showing and show some promise and some moving forward. But I also don't think that people should be, if we lose, should be happy and dancing on the guy's grave because they think he's out. I think what Tom Crean has done for this program over the years deserves our praise and deserves our thanks. I mean, there's been no bigger cheerleader for this program in the last 7 years than Tom Crean, and his relentless positivity through that first 3 years kept this program from falling apart legitimately. I think that's everyone can agree on that. And whether you get annoyed with his relentless positivity or how much he claps on the sideline or whatever, you know what, that's what we needed, and that's what we needed to get through. And no major conference coach has ever had to go through what he went through. So I think that if it is time for divorce and it's time for both parties to walk away from each other, he should be thanked, patted on the back. The entire Hoosier Nation should be grateful for what he's given, and he should be wished well wherever he goes. I mean, we learned from the Mike Davis situation that you cannot act like that towards an outgoing coach, and this is the same kind of thing where people have been booing at games and harping on the guy and harassing his family even a little bit, and you know what, that's just not who we are as a fan base, and there should be no place for that in our fan base. And I think that he should be thanked, and even if this is his last game coming up on Friday, he should be thanked and wished well, and everybody should look back on what he did as a positive, because we're in a much better place now than we were when he came in. And I finished the article saying that he may not be the guy that takes us back to a national championship or puts us back as the top program in America, but he was certainly the right guy to dig us out of the hole we were in, and has put us in a much better place.
Yeah, no, I think that's very well said, and I think that's been the biggest point. I think we've tried to make it on this show a lot, that there's plenty of things to criticize, but you got to balance that out with also praising the things that are there to be praised. And I think the net has been very positive. And those are things that have happened. There's going to be a reasonable discussion after the season for where we go next. And it may be with him, it may be with a new coach. We have no idea. So we'll save all that for after the season. But I thought you did a really nice job of just kind of explaining where things were, where things are, and kind of framing the conversation for what happens next, which is going to be a lot of speculation, but we'll see. We'll see what happens with it. Andy, I didn't know if you wanted to jump in there, if you had any general thoughts.
No, I mean, I think that summed it up really well. I think we've, like you said, we've tried to do a pretty good job over the course of time on the show, particularly this season, and trying to walk the line of being able to criticize, to both be appreciative of what he's done for the program and be able to be objective in our, criticism about decisions that might be made during the game, shortcomings of him as a coach. But I'd like to think haven't lost sight of the good that he has done in spite of the things that we might be frustrated by over the course of the season. So I thought that I kind of read through what Ryan had written while he was talking about it. I thought that summed it up really well.
Yeah, and also, I mean, let me say that I do defend Crean a lot in that article, I think, but at the same time, there are legitimate criticisms, and I try and point those out. I mean, there are legitimate criticisms of him, and so I'm not saying any dissent is wrong. What I'm saying is it needs to be put in context, and the issues and things like that are completely fair to criticize, but I think it should be kept out of Assembly Hall. I think it should be, I don't think you should boo your team, as we've discussed many times. I think that the criticism should come after games, out of Assembly Hall, and we also need to if we're going to criticize, we need to praise the positive that he has done. So that's really my perspective on it, and I could honestly at this point I could see it going either way as far as him returning.
So let's say Indiana makes it to the Elite Eight, loses to Kentucky by 5, and then Brad Stevens decides he wants to come back. Who's coaching at Indiana next year?
Tom Crean is coaching at Indiana if we make it.
That'd be ridiculous.
Why in your scenario do we have to lose to Kentucky? If you're going to have a dream
no, hang on. No, because if we beat Kentucky, then he gets a 30-year contract.
Okay.
If we go to the Elite Eight and beat Kentucky, there's going to be a statue built for Tom Crean outside of the new Assembly Hall. That's why because there's
there well should be.
Yeah. So anyway, that's why I asked the question that way. All right, let's go to some final thoughts. Obviously, we're going to have one more post-game show after Wichita State, but hopefully there's many more shows after that. And, of course, I mean, we're going to have a lot of off-season shows anyway if the off-season is coming, but hopefully we don't have to do that for a couple of weeks. So let's go around the horn. A couple final thoughts leading us into the first round. Ryan, you go first.
Yeah, I will be doing the post-game show from a hotel in Wisconsin, by the way, on Friday, so that should be fun. I apologize if there are any issues ahead of time, but I will be there. Also, first of all, I want to say congratulations to Uncle Jerod, whose brother has a daughter now.
Thank you.
Who's 1 day old, so congratulations to that.
Yeah, and she has, by the way, I ordered some little infant IU clothes, so she'll have them ready for Friday.
Awesome, perfect.
You're ready to go.
I just want to say, I would just like to say, I think this is a good matchup for IU. I think that it's going to be a guard-heavy game, as that tends to play into our favor. But, we should all be really excited. This team got in. They got in clearly easily. I mean, the committee obviously thought higher of them than most people in the national media. They're the top number 10 seed in the tournament, which is comfortably in. And so we were really fretting about the bubble for a few weeks, as I think most people were, and it really didn't end up being an issue. So I think that we should be proud of that and be excited, because we've got a pretty good matchup with this team. And I would rather have a good Wichita State team that plays like this, that plays the way they do, than, because I think Wichita State should have been seeded higher personally. I think they should have been about a 5 or 6. But I'd rather face a good Wichita State team that we match up with than a team with a ton of size who should be a 7 seed. So, it's going to be fun to watch, and we should all be excited about it and see how they do in the postseason.
Yep. Mr. Bottoms?
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd like to think a little bit of what you said earlier, Jared, where, being away from Bloomington might help this team a little bit. I think the other thing that helps a bit is, for all the time that was spent discussing the bubble and who had him in and who had him out and all those things, I mean, I think it's pretty hard to remove yourself from that as a college kid going through, the rigors of the season. And I'm sure that the pressure started to mount on those guys toward the end of the year. Well, that's all in the past at this point, and they can just hopefully go out and play basketball and play well. I really do think it's a coin flip game, and one that they, there's nothing glaring that says they can't win this game. There are certainly other matchups out there where you could look at it and say, look, this is going to take a miracle. This certainly doesn't fall into that category for me. So just hopefully come out and play well. I think Yogi, a couple years removed from that Syracuse game, is you think about how much he's grown and matured since that time, and you look forward to a guy like Troy playing in his first NCAA tournament, after last season, and so you hope those guys are excited and bring some of that energy to the floor, hopefully in a controlled way. But I think it'll be an interesting test in what's been a kind of a roller coaster season. And I think I expect nothing less than a series of emotional highs and lows over the course of the game on Friday afternoon, and I hope that it ends on a high note, and we'll talk about it either way on the show.
Yeah, I think I think getting back to the Kareem conversation, I think the one thing that when you look back over his 7 years is that he's done really well and the team's done really well in that underdog role, and when the expectations haven't been quite as high. And then I think part of the struggle Indiana fans have had is that when the expectations have been there, Kareem teams haven't always lived up to them. And I think that's kind of the big discussion as you look forward, and we'll get to that. But I think when you take that and you look at it in the immediate context of this game on Friday, I think that bodes very well for Indiana, because I think you're the lower seeded team. Most people that I've seen are picking Wichita State. You've got Wichita State's media looking ahead to the Kansas game. All these things. I mean, surely Tom Crean knows that there's a faction of the Indiana fan base that loves Greg Marshall and would replace him as coach in a heartbeat. And Crean is a fighter, and Crean is a gritty guy. And I think, to me, all of those things add up to a team that's ready to play. And the big question with Indiana this year has not been, are we capable? Do we have the talent? Do we have the ability? It's which Indiana team is going to show up. And so I think if you can give me confidence that the right Indiana team will show up, then I think we're going to win. And I think we can beat a lot of teams when we show up with the right mindset. And so to me, a lot of things point in that direction, a lot of legitimate things. Just having watched this team over 7 years and having a pretty decent feel for how they're going to show up in games, because a team a lot of times takes on the personality, the disposition of its coach. And these just seem to be the type of games that Tom Crean teams show up for, so I think Indiana will show up, and I think overall they're the more talented team, man for man. So I know Wichita State has the experience, and they're a very good team, and it's going to be a really tough matchup for us because their guards are so good. But I just think that with believing that we're going to come ready to play, having a little bit of a talent edge, having a big matchup issue for them like a Troy Williams, and just believing that Yogi is ready to lead, and what I've seen from him over the last few games tells me that, I feel good. I've got a good gut feeling. It's going to come down to a couple plays here or there. Maybe this is the game where Yogi's last second shot falls in. The basketball gods owe him. So however it happens, I think Indiana's going to come away from this game with a win, and I think there's a lot of legitimate reasons to believe. So, hey, all we're guaranteed for the rest of the season as fans is 40 more minutes. So let's cheer like hell. Let's cheer our hearts out and hope that we get 40 more minutes after that as a bonus. But I think this team's capable, and I think they'll take care of business on Friday. All right, everybody, thank you for watching live. We will, of course, post this on the podcast, so you can listen to that up to tomorrow. Go to assemblycall.com/bracket. Get in the bracket challenge. You can obviously enter all the way up until the first game start on Thursday. And with that said, let's all go watch the rest of this Dayton game. I don't even know the score, and then get ready for all the madness to start tomorrow. It's the most wonderful time of the year. Let's all enjoy it.